Good morning and a very warm welcome to the penultimate session of the CA Online Conference 2021. Thank you very much for joining me for this branches panel. My name is Katrina Kelly and I'm the branches officer for the Classical Association, as well as the founder and chair of the Lytham St Anne's branch. Before I introduce our four panelists this morning, I'd just like to give you a quick introduction to the platform and how you can engage with the session this morning. As you probably already know from previous events at this conference, you'll have on the right-hand side of your screen a live Q&A and a discussion forum. Please do introduce yourselves in the discussion forum, and particularly if you're a member of a CA branch, it would be great to hear whereabouts you're based in the UK or beyond. Do feel free to chat, comment and interact in the discussion forum throughout the session. We really want to hear your thoughts, perspectives, responses and ideas. So we will try our very best to read them all as we talk. We might not be able to catch every comment though, so if you would like to ask myself or one of the panelists a specific question, or to move on to a new topic for discussion, then please put it in the Q&A box. The Q&A will be monitored, so there'll be a brief delay before your question appears to everybody, but you will also be able to vote for the questions that you would most like to be answered. We welcome questions. First half of this session will begin with an introduction to and an overview of CA branches. We will then extend into a structured panel discussion before we focus solely on your questions in the closing stages. This is the first time that there has been a branches feature at a CA conference. There did used to be a lunchtime focus group and branches meet up in the 1980s and 90s, but we hope that this will be the start of many more to come. We hope that the session not only recognises the great work that so many volunteers do around the country to bring classics to local communities, but also encourages many more people to get involved, to join or support a branch, or maybe even start a new one. So we hope you enjoy the session and thank you once again for joining us this Thursday morning. I became branches officer in autumn 2020, taking over from Barbara Finney, who was the previous branches secretary, and I represent branches at the CA Council and coordinate support for them, from providing outreach funding and speaker lists to digital assistance, and in light of COVID, providing free Zoom webinar access and technical training for branches who want to move their events online, as well as COVID support grants to replace income that may have been lost due to the pandemic. Now, branches have always been a key part of the CA since the very beginning. The foundation of the first branch in England and Wales in Manchester and District in 1904 was masterminded by one of the CA's founders, Professor Robert Conway, who was immediately conscious of the need for local organisations to coordinate local events and to create opportunities for friendly intercourse amongst all lovers of classical learning in this country. Naturally, many of the early branches were based in university towns and run by those involved in university departments or local schools. There was a flurry of branch building in Birmingham, Liverpool, Nottingham, London, Durham, Bristol, Cardiff and Leeds. Meanwhile, the Classical Association of Scotland, based in St Andrews and since 1902, also developed its main regional centres in Edinburgh in the southeast in 1922 and Glasgow and the west. During the interwar years, there was even greater geographical coverage, with branches springing up in Sheffield, Kent, Southampton, Cambridge, Hull, Reading, Leicester and Swansea, amongst many others. These branches were independent from but affiliated to the National CA, with members joining the local branch, and if they chose to also join the CA, then branches could keep a proportion of the membership fees. A real boon. Branches today continue to have their own committees, their constitutions, finances, members, goals and activities, although they can now access greater financial support from the CA. And branch membership ranges from 10 to 50 to 100 to 500. Since the 1940s, several branches have hosted schools competitions, in addition to lectures and teaching events. These have been really successful, and many branches still run outreach events, often in the shape of Latin or Greek reading competitions, but also essays or creative competitions too. alongside other initiatives such as ambassador schemes and fundraising for bursaries for students to attend classics summer schools. Many branches also offer a range of social events, excursions, play readings, performances, symposia, Latin and Greek reading groups, book clubs. There is so much scope for freedom and flexibility when it comes to running and enjoying being part of a branch. While many early branches are still going strong, others have lapsed over the last century, and this map shows the locations of current branches. We can see that there are some key gaps, for example, in North Wales, East Anglia, Cumbria, and sort of Devon and Cornwall, where there were once branches, such as those in Bangor, Taunton, and Lancaster, and hopefully there might be soon some revivals. Whilst it's great that at first glance there is a good spread of branches across the UK, there are still, of course, gaps that can be filled. There are large parts of the north of England, of Wales, and of Scotland as yet untapped, and even London has a surprisingly small CA presence. And where there is a branch, of course, within an hour's radius, that can still be too far for many people to travel to. Indeed, it was for this reason that I founded the Lytham St Anne's branch in 2014. It was a 70-minute journey to my nearest branches in Liverpool and Manchester, and I wanted to bring classics to a part of the world that didn't have a nearby classics department, or at that time was in an area that didn't have much access to the subject. We had no idea what to expect, but by tapping into our own local community, with unexpected yet fantastic amounts of latent interest in the ancient world. We now have over 500 members, and if there is this much enthusiasm for classics on the Lancashire coast, just as Peter Wright was showing us in a panel earlier this week with Classics for All's tremendous work in Blackpool schools, then it may well be true for the rest of the UK as well. As we will see shortly and discuss in this panel, no two branches are the same, and much depends on local demographics, which does affect things like the diversity of membership and venues, interactions with local schools, and the history of classics and/or branches in that area. But branches' uniqueness is something to be celebrated. As we look to the future, we hope that branches can keep providing access to classics for those outside of academia or school settings, who want to reconnect with or discover the ancient world for the very first time, as well as to those already within education. Branches really can be that place, as was mentioned in a panel earlier this week, for people of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences to come together and to be included in classics. So now to talk more about branches in 2021 and beyond, I'm delighted to be joined today by 4 committee members of branches from around the UK. They are Stephen Clifford from North Staffordshire, Dr. Richard Cole from Bristol, Dr. Rosanna Omutawoju from Cambridge, and Dr. Sairithi Pugh from Aberdeen and North Scotland. You can see here the dates in brackets of when those branches were founded, not when those lovely people were born or anything like that, but it gives a real sense not only of the geographical spread, but also the spread in ages of branches across the UK. So a very warm welcome to our panellists today. I'm really excited to talk with you and learn more about your branches, as well as sharing our perspectives on the role of CA branches in the future. So to begin our discussion, whilst many branches have had to halt their activities during the pandemic, some, of course, have also been able to move online. So I thought, Richard, we could come to you first, and that what have been some of the pros and cons of hosting online events this year?
Thank you, Katrina, and hi everyone. It's a good question. I think we were a little late to the party in that we started our online events sort of late autumn last year and have slowly sort of picked up pace. I know other branches were ahead of that and have already hosted quite a few online events. The real benefits, I think, have come from actually expanding that traditional local sort of scope of the branches, which is interesting in itself, and I'm intrigued as to what change that will have beyond the pandemic. But the real benefit for us was starting to host webinars that attracted sort of around 177 unique sign-ups for our last one, which is more than 177 people probably. And that was the largest number we had for any previous event. But more importantly was what was really interesting about that numerical figure was the range of where those people, the scope of where those people were joining from. So in the sort of in the run up to the event, I was communicating individually with each person that wanted to sign up to avoid sort of just spreading the link throughout the internet. And it was just fascinating because people were getting in touch and saying why they wanted to join the event, which was something that, again, you might get a little bit of at a local level, but what was quite interesting was just seeing how many people were interested in the topic that we had proposed from literally around the world. So we had people joining from the States, from Europe, from Japan, from South Africa, from Germany, from Italy, Malta. I mean, it was an incredible range, and that was really heartening to see, really quite surprising in some ways. And it generated a really exciting online event where we were able to run a webinar much like we would have run a major lecture, have a live Q&A where people were actually able to verbally share their questions with the speaker at the end, and have a response, a sort of over half an hour Q&A post the lecture. So there was a real benefit, I think, to offering something online that people could really engage with, and could I think it targeted a lot of what people were interested in, for many different reasons. So we hosted a webinar recently on women in the Trojan War, and our speaker was Dr. Emily Hauser from Exeter, a novelist herself and an academic, and she I think her topic really appealed across the board, and so we were able to have students from schools in the UK contacting me saying, I want to join, I'm studying class Civ, or I'm just studying English and I want to look at this. And we have people from universities across the country who were studying at undergraduate, masters and PhD level. Then we had school teachers, just people with amateur interest, retirees. There was the whole range that the CA branches sometimes have in a kind of small sort of core, but it was like expanding that just ever more. So that was a real benefit. And we've also been hosting other events online, like a reading group, and that's been really popular, and is able to sort of boost our core sort of interest groups that would already attended something like that, and again expand that just slightly geographically so that people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to attend can. So that's been a real benefit. And we've also been able to keep our Latin play competition going, mostly because although schools, there's been a lot of difficulties, a huge amount of difficulty they've been facing, but they've still wanted to engage, which is, again, really heartening and inspiring. And so we wanted to offer something this year. And so we've used technology to enable schools to still write their plays, perform their plays, share it with us in a recording, and then host an online sort of prize giving at the end of it. So there are ways we've been trying to use technology to, if not duplicate what we do, then be clever about how we can continue some type of program, even when there are severe restrictions in place. Of course, that doesn't necessarily make up for all the benefits of meeting in person. Webinars are brilliant, but you don't get that lovely sort of post or pre and post lecture buzz where people can share ideas, meet new people, network, and students are there with a whole range of different demographics, and you get that really exciting sort of community spirit and feel, and you do lose some of those things, but I do think you can still make up for it in other areas. What will be interesting is how we carry some of those things through, which I know is a topic we'll pick up from, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Richard. Stephen, would you like to give a perspective from sort of the staff's angle of how you find the pros and cons of having events online this year?
Well, I think, unlike Richard, I'm afraid we've been spreading our link worldwide through our webpage and not hiding it, and we've not had any problem with that. Although we've therefore missed out on getting people writing in and saying why they were joining us. I mean, one of the big pros is we've been able to go on offering our lectures at the normal times. The live audience has been much what we've been used to in real space, in a meeting room. Sadly, some of our regulars have clearly not felt able to join us by Zoom. On the other hand, we've been joined by people from other parts of the country. We have a Facebook page which already had quite a few members, sorry, a Facebook group, members from beyond our area who wouldn't have been coming to our lectures in person, and we've seen them in Zoom from parts of Lancashire between Lytham and Liverpool, strangely enough, who could also go towards Lytham, as I now discover. And we've also been recording our lectures and showing them on our YouTube channel that we set up this year. And the first two have both had 3 times as many views as watched live. Whether anybody's watching them more than once, I don't know. But it would appear that therefore these lectures have been seen and heard by more people than would have been the case if it had just been 25 in a room chatting. But then you do lose exactly what Richard said, the interaction afterwards. You also lose, which we very much miss, being able to take the speaker out for a meal, which for a few of us is always one of the high spots of the evening. Although, of course, without the audience being present, we don't have to struggle to get the speaker away in time to get to the restaurant while being buttonholed by members of the audience. So I think that you gain an awful lot, but we have lost an awful lot. And we're going to say later, aren't we? But that how to keep the best bits while also regaining the best bits of meeting in person is going to be something facing us in the next year.
It is indeed. Thank you very much, Stephen. I think we'll move on to that question really of what do we intend, what can we carry forward and have learnt to our future programmes. So Ruthie, can I come to you first?
Thanks, Katrina. Yes, I mean, so much of what Richard and Stephen were saying there about the advantages of online really resonate with me. We're in the funny position, of course, of having been born as a branch very, very shortly before the pandemic hit. And so, in fact, most of our existence has been online. We started in September at the beginning of our 2020, autumn 2020 season. And certainly, I do, sympathise with the problems that Stephen was voicing there. In that, I know that some of our local members haven't been joining the Zoom sessions, and so we don't want to exclude them by continuing online only. But on the other hand, there are those very sort of tangible advantages. Of course, for one thing, our position is rather different to a lot of the English branches of the Classical Association, because we nominally cover Aberdeen and the north of Scotland, which is of course a vast geographic area. The other two branches of the Classical Association of Scotland, Glasgow and Edinburgh, are both in the Central Belt. They look really close together on the map. And Aberdeen's kind of way up there, but there's a continent above it as well. We're supposed to cover all of that. And we haven't really managed to sort of publicise and attract people from very far beyond Aberdeenshire yet, but it's our hope that we will be able to ultimately. And of course, for physical in-person events, it would be impossible for even those potential members, who would count as our local members, to actually come to Aberdeen to attend an event, because that would be a trip, a whole day's drive or something. So we're looking to continue with online talks as at least a portion of our offering, but also to mix that in with some in-person events. And we're sort of thinking and kind of consulting with the membership and discussing what those proportions should be. But I'm thinking maybe sort of 3 or 4 in-person events per year, and then 2 or 3 times that many online events will be a good balance going forward. But one of the things that we've really missed with the online only offering is the possibility of working in a sort of hands-on way with schools. And of course, that's impossible during the lockdown, but we had to postpone a lovely, it was the Galen Roadshow, which John Wilkins was going to come up and do from Exeter in a local school. And we've got another in the pipeline. And because those are very interactive and very hands-on, we don't want to just put them online and really dilute the experience. So we're looking forward to being able to do those sorts of things after this is over.
Thanks very much, Saruki, and really showing there the challenges too of being, as you say, covering such a wide area across Scotland, but really interesting too about the hybrid nature perhaps going forwards. Rosanna, are there other things as well that you intend to sort of carry forward to future programmes from Cambridge? I don't think we can quite hear you, Rosanna. No problem. We'll try and get the sound back there. We've talked a little bit about the benefits of hosting in-person events. How many events do we host a year? Stephen, could you give us a little sense of how your programme as a branch normally looks in a more normal year than COVID?
We try and have 4 or 5 lectures differing year on year, and 2 or 3 play readings in translation. I say play readings, occasionally it's been like a reading from Aeneid or something rather than a play. The plays have actually worked, just as a side issue, very well on Zoom. We've found with instead of copying the text for people, having screen sharing one text and then having assigned roles in advance, that works very well as a Zoom group, maybe even better than in person. And then throughout the year we have normally Latin and Greek reading groups for a minority of our members, some not for beginners. We also, a member does offer beginners Latin, but and our 80+ retired classics teacher who leads the reading groups would have been delighted to run these on Zoom, and they both meet monthly normally, but unfortunately his members have resisted doing so, so they're in abeyance at the moment. And then every year, except last year sadly, we normally run a coach trip in May to a classical site in this country, within range of one driver. Can't afford to have 2 drivers on the coaches, unfortunately. And we've been doing that for 20 years until last May, when obviously we had to call it off. We were planning to run it this May, but we're currently looking, because it doesn't fit perfectly in with the easing dates, whether people would like to try and run it in July, or whether really they'd like to wait till things are more normal again before we try that. That would be a normal year for us.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen. And Richard, is there anything else that the Bristol branch does similarly or differently?
And the Latin play competition is probably one of our unique offerings, where we get schools to, as I said earlier, to sort of write their own or make use of the play text that exists, perform that in Latin in the summer normally at a local school in Bristol, where they all come together, perform their play, then that play is judged, and we hand out prizes in book tokens. And it's gotten so big over the last few years that we now offer a minimus competition for students studying Latin using the minimus syllabus, and a senior competition for students who've been learning for a few more years. And it's proven to be really quite popular across the state and private sector, and has particularly offered a chance for teachers to engage students sort of later on in the year when certain things have come to an end and exams have happened, and they can turn their attention to something that engages the students in learning sort of something about the classical world, but also learning how to perform, how to put on a play, how to be creative in that respect. And so I think it's been quite useful across the board, and it's something, as I said, we were very sad to lose last year, but it had managed to bring something together this year, and that's thanks to the huge effort of the rest of the committee and the schools for carrying on through all of this.
Thank you. And yes, it's brilliant to hear so many events that are run both for schools and for members of all ages as well, and to have that interaction. And you just mentioned there about teachers, students, but volunteers as well, and committees. And I'd like to just add very much, thanks to all those people who get involved with branches, because they could not exist without committee members like yourselves, but with also volunteers that help in so many ways run those events that are online, in person. So one thing that I've missed by running things online is not being able to interact with and see our volunteers kind of in action in the same way as when we have events in person. I think we'll come back to Rosanna in a second, if when the audio is working. Richard, I was just going to ask also, just to follow up on that one, with about how you fund your events, and be interested to hear, I suppose, perspectives from everybody on this sense, how you fund your events, how you break even as a branch.
It's all through subscriptions, really, an annual subscription. We try to be very fair. So students from school up to university and teachers are free, so they can just enjoy the events at any point during the year, to make it as easy for access as possible. But for normal members, we charge around £10 a year, I think, and it's less for a couple. And then that means they can come to any of our events, engage in any way they want to, dip in and out. So that's how we fund, or have traditionally funded, speaker expenses, speaker fees if we've needed them when we've hired particular sort of performers to come and give a really big lecture, or deliver a performance, and that's been our way of breaking even each year. And then the CA has been very generous with helping with prize money for things like the Latin play competition. So there's useful ways of breaking even.
Rosanna, I don't know if we can come to you. Not quite at the moment, I don't think. In that case, yeah, so I would talk just a bit about, because I know all branches are funded differently, and membership levels in particular not only range in price, but also in age and in quantity. But how do people go about attracting new members? Obviously, we've mentioned with online events that there are, and Stephen, you mentioned Facebook groups. With online events, it's a lot easier perhaps to publicise those sorts of things. But when it's for a normal programme and forward, how best do you think that branches can attract new members?
Well, we have a mailing list that's twice our membership, and we've always said all our events, apart from the coach trip, are free to all. Our local sub is £5 a year, and we also, of course, take care to run at least one Roman Society joint event and one Hellenic Society joint event each year, so that we can claim help with the travel expenses. Not that there have been any this year, of course. And every year I encourage, when I send out the programme to our full mailing list, more people to join. But we, as I say, we don't make it compulsory for anybody to be a member, even to go on the coach trip. But everybody does pay for that, of course. And we just, with that, you having got a price for the coach, you just have to try and estimate how many people will go and set a price that will break even, so that with subs and the help from the two societies, and in future perhaps from the CA itself, we break even each year. As long as we break even, we're all right, basically.
Do you mind if I come in? That was really interesting to hear, Stephen, because we're in a slightly odd position where the lockdown happened and we ended up having to sort of postpone our remaining talks of the year and then resume online. At a point where we hadn't yet managed to get through the unexpectedly, incredibly onerous task of setting up a bank account. So we have always been and still remain officially penniless. And this, of course, meant that the lockdown and going online had a huge added advantage for us, in that it meant suddenly we didn't have to wonder how on earth we were going to find the money to reimburse travel expenses for any visiting speakers. And prior to that point, we'd just been very lucky that some generous people came and gave wonderful talks and claimed the expenses back from their own universities, including even one from the United States, which was amazing. And suddenly the world was our oyster, and I've been inviting people with gay abandon from all the continents, and they've just come and given wonderful talks which we could never otherwise have paid for. But obviously, when we do resume in-person talks, we're going to have to get some cash, and we have now got a bank account at last. But I've been really kind of wrestling with the idea of asking for a subscription. But even when some of the talks are online, and wondering whether I can make the online ones freely available to all, wherever they are in the world, as we do at the moment, whether people will still bother to pay the membership fee. But you find in Bristol that half the people do still pay the subscription fee, even though they know that they could get a lot of the, or almost all of the benefits without that. That's reassuring.
In North Staff's half pub, yeah. And I thought we were doing really well in getting 50 plus subscribing local members each year, until I heard how many Katrina's got.
Oh, it's very, very different in terms of range across the country. And we were so surprised by kind of what's happened in Lytham. But I do think that there's so much kind of untapped interest out there, and the work that all of the branches are doing is so important to, as you say, to find those people and give them access. But that was really interesting, Cyrene, because one of the things that branches, especially when you're a new branch, is about how not only you get your members, but how can you afford to pay for things like many branches have to pay for their venues, or for things like speakers, lighting, that sort of thing. They might have to pay public liability insurance, all these kind of hidden costs that you don't necessarily think of and aren't linked just to the giving of the event or the lecturer themselves.
And
we found that,
sorry, it's just that I should have mentioned, of course, that we were the beneficiaries of the University of Aberdeen kindly allows us to use their room for talks, and the Classical Association of Scotland central organisation did offer to sort of lend us, donate some money if it push came to shove and we needed it. It's just that we didn't get quite to that stage before the lockdown happened. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on.
No, of course. And from the Lytham perspective, that we've seen that one of the main reasons of where our memberships money goes is on our outreach program. So I know that lots of the hosting competitions, as we said, and running, some branches do bursary schemes for summer schools, so some of the membership fees. And I think members often like knowing that not only are they accessing and joining a community, but they're also supporting their fellow people who are interested in classics in that community. So that's a really good way that that kind of increases engagement and access for people via the CA branch in that way. Rosanna, let's see if the audio is working.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what caused it. Shall I just chip in with funding issues as well? We used to have a subscription, but we don't anymore, although we do have a small group of people who still pay it, even though we've told them they don't need to. We're a lot like Saritha said, we're very lucky with our connection with Cambridge University, because they host things. You know, they allow us to use their rooms. They're also pretty generous with a little bit of money that we can use on the social events that we run. So we actually managed to cope a lot with that situation. Then of course we apply for money from the central CA for help with, when we need it, with speakers' expenses, etc.
Thank you. And if you, Rosanna, if you'd like to respond to anything from earlier in terms of what you know, how we take programs forward post-COVID, or some of the best aspects of hosting those in-person or online events, then please do feel to have your contribution.
Yeah, thank you. I think I had been going to say that we would be continuing with a hybrid model for very much for the reasons that other people spoke about, the kind of balance between being able to get a wider audience with online things. Something that we were very struck with via the schools that work with us was the degree to which they felt that online wasn't doing the same job for helping school students see the variety of other school students who are studying classical subjects, and what a significantly positive element that had been. So going forward next year, for instance, one very hybrid model that we're going to try and do is run in-person reading competitions, if we're allowed to, because reading competitions is something that we've regularly run, but also at the same time do a online version, so that we can run those two events parallel, with the hope that we can still get the kind of physical buzz of having students doing it in a room together and seeing how many people are also do the slightly weird things of reading Latin to each other, but at the same time making it possible to reach a wider audience via keeping an online element going as well.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds like a great solution, and it'd be great to see that happening in that hybrid way to engage as many people as possible, as you say, going forward. Because I know we've all been involved in CA branches for differing degrees of time, and our branches are also of differing ages. So I'd be interested to hear kind of what advice would each of you give to somebody who was looking to get involved with, or potentially, even start a new branch in the future. What would be your advice? Richard, should we come to you first?
It's a good question. I think that some of the things that have made working with the Bristol branch a lot easier is the connections we have with local schools and with the University of Bristol. It's already been mentioned how flexible and helpful that has been to putting on events, but in terms of actually sort of just managing and running the branch, it's invaluable. I mean, we have teachers on the committee we can talk to about the syllabus, so we can work out what type of talks would appeal most to students and local students, and then we've got university staff chairing and presiding over the committee, and they're wonderful for helping to source speakers, and then we work with local outreach initiatives sort of hosted at Bristol but funded by people like Classics for All, that mean we can have even greater sort of public outreach and engagement sort of appeal and reach. So yeah, I think that working with partners and doing that from the ground up is really helpful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Stephen?
Well, our experience was different, of course, in that we had a 50-year-old branch that lost its academic department when Keel's Classics department moved to Manchester. But some of us who were attached to Keel in other ways and had been attending meetings, which were very much an adjunct of the special final year special subjects until then, wanted to keep a branch going for the general public and ideally for local schools, although a couple of members of the department still lived in the area and have been very active ever since. Somebody, still a Manchester member of staff, is involved in both CA branches. So to begin with, it was just anybody who was willing would help out. And we've tried to involve schools in the way that Richard had a start with schools. it's been very difficult, to be honest. Even the sixth form college, where we've tried to, in Stoke, where we've tried to have a lecture each of the last couple of years to fit in with their Class Civ A-level programme, are very reluctant to publicise our other meetings to their students, who've come in quite good numbers when we're actually on the premises, sometimes brought back by their parents, which brought in another new person to our meetings. But the staff tell us that even though these are A-level students, because those who are 16 and 17, they really, if they're encouraging them to attend anything, they ought to be going themselves. Now, we might say that we think those classics teachers locally ought to be coming to our events, but if they've had a long day and then they really going out again in order to keep an eye on a 17-year-old who's attending a relatively popular academic lecture, it isn't something they want to do. So they don't publicise them to the students, which is, and the local independent school, which you'd have thought similarly might do, regularly fail to engage with us. So we would love to get more young attendees. We have the occasional Keel student who picks up on something we're doing, who's obviously not doing a classics subject, but comes along out of general interest, like our regular audience. But the school students, unless you go to them, we find it very difficult to get them to come. Maybe they'd be perfectly happy to come and do something on their own, but they're not. We can't get the news to them, which is sad, I feel.
Yeah, well, teachers and students, if you're listening now, then if you go onto our branch's website, then you can see the map and all the contact details of different branches to find if there is a branch near you. And perhaps if you haven't already heard of events, that there is a way for schools to become involved and fully understand as well the problems, as you're saying there, Stephen, with the time commitment, already the pressures and difficulties on students and teachers to do extracurricular things. But I know, speaking from experience and from students that I've talked to and ambassadors that we've had, that they have found it such a great experience to get to meet other like-minded people and to listen to lectures and be involved in events and all that sort of thing. So the more that we can work together, and hopefully this branch network will help, but also working directly with the CA, with Classics for All, with other organisations, and with our own outreach team at the CA, to try and join those links and make those connections where possible, so that students and teachers can get the help, support, and interesting events that they want. Sarithi and Rosanna.
Any A-level students? Sorry, just to say, and if there are any A-level or GCSE students from the North South Cheshire area who are dipping into this today, just find our website and you're welcome to come on your own without having to tell the school about it.
Exactly, that's one thing too, is that branches are really informal ways. It's not, as you say, it's not and we're trying to make this not an academic elitist environment, nor equally another school event to go to. It's something that is for everybody and is informal and often really fun. And sometimes you might get cake as well, or refreshments on the evening. So lots and lots to enjoy when we can meet again in person. Sarithi, can I come to you, especially with the experience, obviously, as we've already said, in quite strange circumstances, but of starting a new branch?
Yeah, I mean, strange in more than one way, really. I mean, to pick up on I want to pick up on a couple of things that Stephen was talking about there. I mean, firstly, I sympathise with the closure of the classics department at Keel having affected your branch. And of course, at Aberdeen, we're in the even stranger situation of we're setting up this new centre, or rather we have done, in Aberdeen, where the classics department, closed down decades ago. So it seemed in a way like a very daunting prospect. So I suppose that this is also, a message to anyone out there in an area where the local university doesn't have a classics department. Don't let that put you off. Because one thing that I discovered, I had been living in Aberdeen and working at the university for, I don't know, probably 12 or 13 years. Without a classics department. I should explain, I work in an English department and I work on classical reception. So I'm not a classicist sort of as my first kind of my main occupation. I am just very passionate about classics. And I was really feeling the absence, partly, of course, because being so far in the north, it was less easier than it used to be when I was living in Oxford, you know, to just turn up to things. So feeling very isolated. But it took me years and years to discover that there were lots of individuals like me who had classics as a second string to their bow, but who were working in the philosophy department or the history department or the divinity department. We were scattered all over the place and we didn't know about each other because there was nowhere to gather. And so actually that's a wealth of sort of experience and interest that's probably going to be hiding in the cracks in the woodwork in any university. So as long as you can get the word out and tell people that there is now this thing that they can come to and share their peculiar hobby with others, that will happen. And the other thing I'd say is just to echo the point that Richard and Stephen were both making about getting local school teachers involved, particularly since I do really sympathise with the difficulty that Stephen was talking about in getting schools to be very willing and ready and nimble in advertising events to their pupils. I think particularly with state schools, there seems to be a really huge bureaucracy which arises out of the very very understandable and good sense that they need to safeguard children. But it does make organising events for state schools something that you have to do a long time in advance, and having teachers on board who know how those systems work is really important. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but I've actually forgotten the question now because we've all been talking for so long. So
no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Sarah. We'll come to Rosanna, and then we have got some questions coming in from the audience which directly relate to this. So I'll come to those once we've just heard from Rosanna.
Just answer very quickly then. I think as we've heard from other people, trying to link up different sections is so important. And I've found that having particular individuals who are very gung-ho and enthusiastic. So I think in an ideal world, making a committee that has an academic on it, that has teachers in the local area on it, that has someone who's retired and keyed into the U3A community, that having a committee that has tentacles in different areas, I think can be a very positive way of trying to activate as many different areas, and finding those people who are themselves plugged into those networks and are keen to promote. But we've had possibly slightly luckier experience with a very big and enthusiastic sixth form college, and also some private schools that have quite a lot of classics going on. But I do still recognise all of the other issues, and I think Sarith has very hard for state schools to get time out of school, to all the bureaucracy. I think that's increasingly a problem, which is such a shame for the primarily for the young people who could be getting even more out of connecting with classics.
Thank you, Rosanna. And just this directly, so we've had some questions and comments from the audience. So thank you, everybody, for sending those in. One that we've had, just a point here from Alice Case, who's the Classics for All North coordinator, to Stephen and other branches to please contact your local Classics for All branch or hub, and they can try and help link you up with local schools. So there are email details and contacts there over on the platform, which is fantastic. A question from Arlene Holmes-Henderson for Stephen is about North staffs. Does the branch have social media? Which is a point, I suppose, more generally, because I know many branches do, many branches don't, because that can also help through retweeting, etc., to reach teachers and school pupils.
Yes, we have our Facebook group as well as our website, and which people freely post on and chat, and it goes way beyond our membership, but not particularly to the schools community locally. We talk to people in various parts of the country on classical matters, but we seem to be servicing more than just the North Staff South Cheshire area.
Yeah, and as I'd like to say as well, from as branches officer, then I'm very very keen to help support branches with social media that perhaps have some or don't, but who might want to use other platforms as well that they've not used before. For example, Twitter is a really good way to engage academics, and teachers in schools can be quite useful for sharing information. We've also found using Instagram works quite well with students, getting them involved either in resources or publicising events, sharing. At Lytham, we have some great ambassadors who create posts for that Instagram, so it's kind of on their agency too, to create and then share weekly posts on a certain topic, and that's kind of something else that gets students involved, but through a different medium. But as I say, talking to all branches here, please do contact me as well if you'd like help and support building up that social media presence, and in terms of advertising events as we go forward, especially. We've had another question here from Case about starting a new branch can be a daunting prospect for people with regards to the time required. How much time do you estimate you spend on branch activities? I can speak firstly just from having started a branch, but then it would be great to hear from the four of you just about how much time yourselves, because we all have different roles. We have a couple of secretaries, a president, a chair. So I'm sure that the work is sort of divided up differently for every committee and every branch. But I would say, in terms of starting a new branch, yes, it can appear daunting. I was definitely very much kind of uncertain and afraid at the beginning, and I was grateful to have CA support. And again, please do contact me if you're thinking about doing something like this, because it is a fantastic experience, and there's stuff that you learn from doing it, so many amazing people you meet and work with, but it is a time commitment. So if you're there's no other way of saying it other than that it will be time consuming, and as Verity said, there are kind of new things to deal with, setting up a bank account, those sorts of things. On our CA website, I have written a template, a basic guide of the sorts of steps that you would need to take to start a branch, which hopefully alleviates some of those immediate concerns and gives a roadmap of how you might start. But the main thing is trying to find those people, as we've said, that will help support you. So whether that be, it doesn't have to be teachers or people with a classics background. When we started off our committee, it was through the generosity of friends and family who helped, and none of whom had any classics experience whatsoever, but we're committed to trying to build this community. And we've since had volunteers of all ages join us, and it's those people that really help. But it is a time commitment, but it is something that's really rewarding too. What are other people's perspectives?
I'd say that.
Sorry to answer.
So sorry, Rosanna. Do you want to go first?
I was just going to say, from my perspective, it tends outside term. It's short bursts of a couple of days here and there, but not an overwhelming commitment because I have a very good secretary. But others will know more than me, especially about setting things up.
All I was going to say was that that I found the setting up, the initial stage, incredibly time consuming. So if you begin the process and you think, oh my God, a couple of months in, what have I let myself in for? Don't worry, because it gets so much easier after that. And the situation might be very different for branches of the Classical Association in England, because everything's different in Scotland. So this might not apply, but we had to apply for charitable status, or rather we chose to apply for charitable status independently as Aberdeen Centre. Because Classical Association of Scotland is not a charity itself, unlike the Classical Association. So this might not apply to you, but that is a tremendously time-consuming process. And then setting up a bank account, if you do have charitable status, banks set up an awful lot of hoops you have to jump through. Which I suppose would have been only a little tedious if we hadn't been in a lockdown where we couldn't get together in a room so that all the trustees could sign the same bit of paper physically. But it turned out that it would take almost a year to get that done under current circumstances. It was ghastly. So those early stages, they're very demanding. But after that, and of course, we haven't operated in normal circumstances yet, so I don't know how demanding the kinds of activities which the other panelists have been talking about will be, but certainly in terms of just organising talks and online talks, it's not that bad really, you know. A couple of days to sort of sort out a programme, and then just meeting the speakers and helping them, and it pays such enormous dividends in the joy of having those conversations, which is what it's all about, and knowing that you're giving, you know, your local community the opportunity to enjoy that too.
Yeah, I'd agree with Rosanna. It's bursts of activity for a secretary too. You know, when we're setting up the year's programme, correspondence, arranging venues when you can have a venue, and so on. And then apologies for this cat's tail if anybody's distracted. Then all the liaison with speakers before they come and so on, and normally booking a restaurant for a meal afterwards, occasionally accommodation depending where they've come from. And for other officers, for our treasurer, for instance, it shouldn't be a time-consuming job. Ours, as soon as he became the new treasurer, had to set up a new bank account, which did take ages because the one we had been with for many years started wanting to charge quite punitive costs for the account, and so immediately he had to find an account which we could have for free, because we certainly didn't want to start paying costs, not having charitable status, and so he spent about 3 months working almost full-time on that, but because banks do make these things difficult, but once you're set up you're okay. So
Thanks, that's good to know.
We've only got about 5 minutes left actually, so I'm just gonna, we've had a couple, if anyone has more questions from the audience, please do send them in and we'll try to answer them now. And if not, we can always send you answers and keep in touch via the meeting hub as well afterwards. We've had a great question from Eleanor asking, how can university students, particularly undergrads, be involved in the work of branches? She's enjoyed attending talks, but would like to be able to help out at events and or promote them with other students. That's fantastic, Anna. I'm really excited about that, so thank you. And I think it's such a great point that you know, many branches will interact with students when they're at school or college, and then when they go off, we want to be able to build those links again with universities supporting their own branch, but also students that are moving around the country and are in such a position to spread the word via social media, via their friends, all different sorts of networks. Does anyone have any kind of other points to add on that?
Say briefly that we're hoping to engage people who are coming to our things like the reading group that I host. That we've got a lot of sort of university students who come to that, and we're going to ask them to write blogs about their experience that we can then share with the CA, so they can feel like they're co-producing what we're doing and engaging in that way. I'd also like to say that I actually started as secretary for the Bristol branch a couple of years ago while I was a PhD student, so there are quite literal ways of engaging if the opportunities arise. But you know, in terms of actually working with a branch, then I think that there are lots of opportunities creatively and more formally.
Yeah. I would just say, please get in touch with your local branch. They'll be more than delighted to have enthusiastic volunteers and probably be very keen to get you in the discussion about next year's programme.
Indeed, I agree. And we had one more question from Fabio saying about how would you evaluate the impact of CA branches encouraging students to study classics at schools and university as well. And firstly, for me to say that we found that with the branch we had, thanks to the support of local schools, state colleges in particular, we had a classics ambassador scheme, which meant that students could get directly involved in the branch. They could volunteer, they could meet speakers, give votes of thanks, write blogs and articles, edit a newsletter, etc. And so many of those have seemed to really enjoy the events, gain confidence from that, and then go on to study classics at university. And obviously, so much of that was down to to their teachers and the other work that they were doing, but by putting it down on their personal statement and their CV that they'd been involved in a branch, that they'd been engaged in competition or taken part in other ways and volunteered, that was something that really not only helped them literally get it into universities, but also was a way for them to sort of extend and pursue their passion for classics that way. On that note, if any panelists have anything else to add, then that would be lovely in the closing seconds. Otherwise, thank you again to everybody for taking part, and also everyone for attending this morning.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you, Katrina, for organising it, and thanks, Stephen, Richard and Rosanna. It was really inspiring and very interesting to hear your experiences.
Thank you all. I very much enjoyed it.
Thanks for the great questions.
Yes, thank you to everybody and to the audience for your great questions and comments. And it's so great to have this sense of this network building. We hope to continue to run more branch panel events and to see you all in the future. Thank you all very, very much.